At Lukla, the runway does not simply appear in front of the airplane. It rises out of a Himalayan valley like a ramp, barely more than 500 meters long, with mountains on one side and a drop toward the valley on the other. At Saba, a scheduled turboprop lands on a strip of pavement only about 400 meters long, with cliffs and sea at the ends. In Gibraltar, the runway sits on a narrow piece of land between two bodies of water under the shadow of a giant rock that can twist the wind. These places are often described as airports pilots avoid. That is not quite true. Professional pilots do not avoid them as a universal rule. The real story is more interesting. These are airports where the margin gets smaller, the runway may be short, the wind may be unstable, terrain may block a simple missed approach, the aircraft may need to be exactly the right type, flown by crews with exactly the right training, in weather that stays inside strict limits. So the question is not, why are these airports impossible? They are not. The question is, why do experienced pilots treat them with so much respect? Start in Nepal at Tenzing Hillary Airport, better known as Lukla. For trekkers heading toward Everest, Lukla is a gateway. For pilots, it is a reminder that geography can turn a routine landing into a one-shot calculation at roughly 9,300 feet above sea level. The runway is commonly reported at about 527 meters, and it is not flat. It slopes steeply, which helps arriving aircraft slow down when landing uphill, but also makes the operation highly specific to direction, performance, wind, and procedure. At a normal airport, an unstable approach can usually become a go-around. At Lukla, terrain narrows that option. Thin air reduces aircraft performance, mountain weather can change quickly, and the challenge becomes the whole envelope. Altitude, slope, terrain, weather, and escape routes stacked together. That is why Lukla is not a place for casual improvisation. It is a place where pilots need local knowledge, suitable aircraft, and conservative judgment. The drama is visual, but the mechanism is mathematical. When the runway, the weather, and the terrain all reduce your options at the same time, there is less room to fix a mistake late. Bhutan's Paro International Airport is difficult for a different reason. The runway itself is not tiny by mountain standards, at roughly 2,265 meters. But Paro sits inside a Himalayan valley, surrounded by high terrain, and the arrival is famous for visual maneuvering through that valley. Public aviation reporting consistently describes Paro as requiring specially trained or qualified pilots because the approach demands more than following a long straight line to the runway. The crew must manage altitude, speed, and position while the valley itself dictates what is possible. In poor visibility, the logic is simple. If the terrain and runway environment cannot be seen as required, the operation may not continue. Paro shows one of aviation's most important truths. Safety is not only about building longer runways, it is about matching the procedure to the terrain and matching the crew to the procedure. The airport works because the operation is controlled. Training turns a spectacular approach into a disciplined one. Toncontin in Tegucigalpa, Honduras, earned its reputation from a different kind of pressure. A capital city hills around it, and a runway environment that historically left little room for larger jets to be sloppy. For decades, Toncontin served Tegucigalpa close to the urban core, including an era when Boeing 737 and Airbus A320 class aircraft operated into a field surrounded by terrain and city streets. The difficulty was the combination. Crews had to manage visual maneuvering, align late, control energy precisely, and still land with enough runway to stop. Too high, too fast, or not aligned early enough, and a limited runway becomes unforgiving. Since Palmarola International Airport opened for the Tegucigalpa area in 2021, Toncontin's role in international commercial traffic has been reduced, so this is partly a historical case. The lesson is still valuable. Some airports become famous not because every landing is dramatic, but because the old operational compromise was visible. Put a major city airport in constrained terrain, then ask modern jets to fit inside the margin. Madeira's Cristiano Ronaldo International Airport looks almost engineered to challenge assumptions. Part of its runway is carried on a large elevated structure supported by columns, but the concrete platform is not the main enemy. The bigger issue is the island itself. Madeira sits in the Atlantic, where wind can be complex, disrupted by mountains, and accelerated around terrain. Aircraft approaching the airport may face crosswinds, turbulence, changing conditions, and procedures tailored to a very specific geography. On some days, the question is not whether the pilot is brave enough, it is whether the wind stays within the limits that make the landing sensible. A dramatic runway can look dangerous, but professional aviation is based on limits, crosswind limits, visibility minima, aircraft performance, and stabilized approach criteria. If the numbers do not work, a crew can divert or wait. That is not failure. That is the system working. In the French Alps, Courchevel Altiport changes the scale completely. It serves as a ski resort and is built for mountain aviation, small aircraft, and helicopters, not routine large jet service. The runway is commonly reported at roughly 537 meters long, with a steep gradient of about 18.5%. At around 6,600 feet elevation, surrounded by alpine terrain, it is closer to a mountain road with wings than a conventional runway. The slope is part of the design, uphill to slow down, downhill to accelerate. But that also makes the operation highly directional and specialized. You do not treat Courchevel like a flat runway at a major airport. You treat it like an altiport, where the aircraft, the pilot, and the weather must fit the place. The mechanism is simple. Short runway plus steep slope plus mountain terrain equals little appetite for indecision. Courchevel is demanding because it was built for a narrow mission, and it punishes anyone who forgets that. Then there is Saba in the Caribbean Netherlands, home to Wancho E. Rousken Airport. Its runway is widely cited at about 400 meters, among the shortest used for scheduled commercial service. From the air, it looks almost unreal, a small strip cut into the edge of an island with water and cliffs close by. But again, the real story is not panic. It is suitability. Saba is not a place for large jets. Scheduled service is typically associated with STOL-capable turboprops, the kind of aircraft designed to land and take off in very short distances. The challenge is speed control, touchdown point, braking, and aircraft performance. On a long runway, a few extra knots of speed may still leave plenty of pavement. On a runway this short, extra speed consumes distance like a hidden tax. Saba shows how aviation solves a hard problem by narrowing the operation, use the right aircraft, train for the runway, respect the wind, keep the approach stable. The airport looks extreme because the island offers so little flat land, but the operation is matched to that constraint. Princess Juliana International Airport in St. Martin is the one most people recognize instantly. Aircraft pass low over Maho Beach before touching down, creating one of the most famous aviation images in the world. But this is also the airport where the internet often exaggerates the wrong thing. A low approach over a beach is dramatic for spectators. It does not automatically mean the pilots are doing something unsafe. The actual operational points are practical. The runway is commonly listed around 2,300 meters. Usable for many aircraft, but still requiring careful performance management, especially for larger jets in island conditions. Water, wind, and spectators make it feel more intense than it is from the cockpit. For pilots, the discipline is familiar. Arrive stabilized, at the right speed, on the right path, and be ready to go around if the approach is not right. Princess Juliana teaches the difference between visual drama and operational risk. The camera sees a jet skimming over tourists. The crew sees an approach path, a threshold, wind corrections, landing distance, and company procedures. Innsbruck Airport in Austria brings us back to the mountains, but with a more complex procedural story. The runway is about 2,000 meters long, so the challenge is not simply pavement length. Innsbruck sits inside an alpine valley, serving Tyrol and heavy winter sports traffic. The surrounding terrain, seasonal weather, and valley wind effects make it an airport where special procedures and local qualification matter. Valleys can behave like wind tunnels. Air can accelerate, shift direction, or descend from the mountains in ways that make an approach more demanding. Add winter weather, snow operations, high terrain, and busy seasonal traffic, and the operation becomes a test of planning as much as stick and rudder skill. This is why Innsbruck earns respect. The runway may look normal on paper, but an airport is also the airspace, the terrain around that airspace, and the weather patterns that decide whether the procedure remains practical that day. Finally, Gibraltar International Airport compresses several unusual constraints into one small peninsula. The runway is commonly listed around 1,829 meters. It sits immediately north of the Rock of Gibraltar, with water near both ends and the border with Spain close by. Local easterly Levante winds and turbulence around the rock can make conditions challenging, especially when crosswinds enter the picture. For years, Gibraltar was also famous because Winston Churchill Avenue crossed the runway, creating the surreal image of road traffic stopping for aircraft. That changed with the opening of the Kingsway Tunnel in 2023, which rerouted normal traffic. But the old road crossing was never the main flying challenge. The main challenge is geography. A limited strip of land, terrain nearby, sea at both ends, and local wind behavior shaped by the rock. Gibraltar is a reminder that airports are political and geographic compromises as much as engineering projects. Pilots inherit that compromise every time they brief the approach. Across all 9 airports, the pattern is clear. Lukla reduces margin with altitude, slope, and terrain. Paro reduces it with a Himalayan valley and special visual maneuvering. Toncontin compressed jet operations into a city surrounded by hills. Madeira adds Atlantic wind and island turbulence. Courchevel is a purpose-built alpine altiport with a steep short runway. Saba is a tiny island strip for the right aircraft only. Princess Juliana is more famous visually than it is mysterious technically. Innsbruck is an alpine procedure and weather challenge. Gibraltar is a peninsula runway shaped by wind, water, terrain, and borders. Experienced pilots respect these airports because aviation safety is built on margin. Margin is the extra runway after touchdown, the extra altitude before terrain, the extra visibility before a visual turn, the extra performance when the air gets thin, the extra option if the approach stops looking right. At easy airports, margin can hide small errors. At difficult airports, it is visible. Meters of runway, knots of wind, minutes of weather, and the decision to continue or turn away. That is why the best pilots are not the ones who pretend these airports are ordinary. They are the ones who understand exactly why they are not.